So we actually have a tool here. It's called Group Policy Analytics, right? Nice little node here in the device console. And I actually imported a generic group policy in here. You can see it's from the US Department of Defense, the STIGs that they have. I actually went and downloaded this yesterday. There's a whole set of STIGs that you can actually start with. And this is effectively an export from the group policy management console, right? Which spits out a bunch of files, including an XML file that has the complete results in here, or the complete tally of all the policies that are actually in here. So I actually went and imported it almost instantly. This is a relatively small policy, but it was pretty much instant. It tells me, hey, how many of these policies can I actually directly bring over, right? And if I click on this, it's going to actually tell me which ones, right? It's not just this percentage that's kind of meaningless, but it's going to tell me which ones. And now I can actually go in and I can look, hey, why don't these have MDM support? And there's different reasons why some of them may or may not have MDM support.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the 425 show. So today we're coming to you live and direct to get deep into the weeds, or dare I say it, under the aluminium case of all things device management in Microsoft Entra with Intune. As always, I'm Grace Picking, a product manager in the Identity and Network Access Engineering customer part of the engineering team here at Microsoft. And I have with me Jason to talk about Intune and all things Microsoft Entra ID management. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jason Sandys. I am a product manager. I'm also in customer experience engineering, just in a slightly different portion where we focus on device management. So technically part of the Intune product group at this time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we will be here answering your questions live. So don't forget, if you are tuned in across LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you may be, post us your questions. I'll be here to field them to Jason. We do have some links for you as well that we'll share as we go through. So without further ado, Jason, tell me, what's it all about?
What's it all about? Well, let's go ahead and I guess we'll throw up the slide deck. That's the easiest way to get started. I don't have a ton of slides. I'm going to hopefully hop into a handful of demos here and really talk about some tangible things. One of the things that we've realized in talking about this recently, going to a handful of community events like Workplace Ninja and MMS, is we really need to get a lot more tangible, a lot more directive, prescriptive about what we're telling folks to do. And so a lot of that is really, let's talk about what we can do and what you really, again, what you should be doing. Dip your toes in the water if you haven't started already. So you can see the title slide here, right? Beyond the basics. Some of this is a little bit hand wavy for sure. Some of it is about messaging. We need folks to really draw in and internalize the message, right? The message is going to be very directive in where we want folks to go. Management of devices has a long history. Configuration manager and its predecessor SMS, really not really, it's just a name change, but SMS goes back amazingly almost 30 years, right? That's a long time in the IT industry. It effectively is the same time as the IT industry has existed, at least in the mainstream, right? So there's a lot of really deep-seated things that people have done, and getting folks to change their ways, getting folks to embrace their new ways, it is part of the battle. And so we need to be a little bit, again, hand-wavy about some of this. So let's go on from the title slide there. Again, hopefully not a ton of titles or slides in here, and I'll hop into some demos here pretty quickly. But first, we need to kind of set the level. So the title said Intune and Entra ID joined. Those two things collectively are about what we generally term as cloud native. Again, from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft is about producing cloud solutions, cloud-centric, cloud value-based solutions and products. This is something that we've had, we've had in place for a long time. It's probably going on about 15 years since this direction change has happened. And clearly within the last few years after world events, it's become super important for most organizations. Another important point in here is a lot of folks And I've gotten this my entire IT career as well, is why are you making us change, right? Why is this such a drastic thing? People love to cling on to what they know, and it's understandable. We all do that with a lot of things. But I get that question, well, why are you making us change? And it's like, look, we're generally changing, not because we want to make you change, but because this is the pressure we're getting from the decision makers in the industry. We're not just sitting around going, oh, how can we make people spend more money? Yes, clearly we are a for-profit company, right? Anyone who says anything else or tries to dance around that, right, I think they're being deceptive. It's a true statement. But at the end of the day, for us to make a profit, we want to do the best thing for the customers, and that's doing what the customers want and need us to do based upon their business requirements. That's where all of this is about, right? And the cloud, I've talked to my father-in-law. It's one great conversation I had relatively recently. Is my father-in-law was relatively well placed up. He's retired now, but well placed up in a global organization, and talked about it. Like, from his perspective, he doesn't care about computers. He doesn't care about IT. He doesn't care about how those things happen, and he certainly doesn't want to have to pay an exchange guy. Right? He doesn't even want to know those details. He just wants things to happen. And that's really the promise of the cloud, right? Is let's commoditize those things. He realizes that every organization, and most people realize this because they've adopted things like M365 and Exchange Online. Every organization doesn't need their own Exchange administrator doing one thing, which is sending and receiving email. It just doesn't make sense, right? That's the promise of the cloud. Let's commoditize all those things that everyone is doing, putting it somewhere to a center of excellence, right? It's pretty much an unchallengeable statement that what Azure does is best in class, world class. No one does it better than what Azure does, right? So why not put all of that infrastructure that everyone has in the cloud? And all of those things that are unique to your organization, right? Making widgets, making them faster, better, and cheaper. Whatever that widget is, right? Whether it's a service or an actual physical product, that's what your organization needs to be focusing on, not whether you can actually send emails and not send emails, right? That should just be a given. That's the whole dial tone thing that Bill Gates went back to. Okay, hand wavy. I'll try to get away from that a little bit, but a couple more starting to get into the weeds here, discussions on that. So when we talk about device management and device identity specifically, what does that explicitly mean for your organization, right? These are our two basic recommendations. It's really kind of two branches of one recommendation where we want folks to go. You may not be there today, but you really need to start thinking about these things today. So that's your existing endpoints, right? We talk about hybrid joined, Entra hybrid joined. I'm going to make a couple of baseline assumptions. There are some links that are at the end of this deck that will get shared out. And that are in the deck and that Grace can and will put up here as well about hybrid joined devices, right? It's a device that has an identity both on-prem. It's effectively an on-prem joined device, what we've traditionally known, and it also has a cloud identity. We're not asking anyone to change those existing devices, right? We are asking you to join them to the cloud so that you can get immediate cloud value. So you can start taking advantage of all this awesomeness that we are building in the cloud and all of these additional capabilities that we're bringing to folks. Leave those devices, join them to Entra as well, or hybrid join them to Entra so that you get all of that value. But we're not asking you to do anything explicit to those devices today. The new devices, right? It's that new cutoff point when you're going through your hardware refresh. We understand everyone has a different hardware refresh lifecycle. Windows 11 is probably throwing that all a kilter because of the different floor or hardware floor requirements for Windows 11. That's okay, right? We're all going to have new devices at some point. We know that devices aren't going to last forever. That's when we really, really want you to start going and making this shift, this paradigm shift about your devices in your organization. Doesn't mean getting rid of your on-prem Active Directory. If you still have other uses for your on-prem Active Directory, that's not what this is about. This is about the devices, their management, and their identity themselves. That's when we want you to join them to Entra ID, or really Entra joined, and then start managing them from the cloud, right? To get the most cloud value out of things. To commoditize those things is really the bottom line of these things. The link there at the bottom, and I think Grace just put it up as well, is a discussion about this. A lot of the more intricate details, and there's actually a section in there as well talking about this choice, right? When you should and shouldn't do this, why you should do those things. so that you can, if you're a technical person, take that forward to management. So it's not just you saying it. If you're a management type person, right, so you can actually bring that to your technical people and be like, look, this is the official recommendation from Microsoft, because that's truly what this is. Okay, a couple of kind of bolder statements here. You may not have heard these statements. I think this is kind of that last hand wavy thing, but these are particularly when it comes to co-management. So we talked a little bit about hybrid. Hopefully you know what co-management is well. Co-management is when you manage a Windows device with both Intune and configuration manager, right? So that they're both managing that same device and they're both arbitrating that so that they're not stepping on each other. These are both effectively interim states. They really always have been. We knew for a while that co-management was potentially the best state for folks to be in. And we initially tried to say, hey, we don't want you to be in co-management for too long. And we got a lot of pushback on that. So at that time, I say we, at that time, I wasn't really with Microsoft. Or, I was an MVP. I was out in the community. So I was one of those people that pushed back and was pretty loud that, hey, that's not the right place for customers or Microsoft to be at the time. And it was the right thing to do at the time. We've finally come back full circle. It is the right thing now is for us to start saying the same thing again. Co-management is not the place we want folks to be long-term. These are both interim states for your devices and for your organization as a whole. You can treat them as stepping stones to get where you want to go. You can skip them if you want to skip them, right? We're okay with people skipping them as well. Now, we're not saying just get rid of them all overnight. That's another huge, important message in all of this is none of this is an overnight proposition, right? We fully understand that different organizations are going to have different levels of work and that you're going to have to stage these things across your organization. So, don't expect, right? Particularly don't expect, but don't, go to your management and portray it or even get in your head that, oh, I've got to do this all at once. You're just going to eat yourself up doing that. You're going to get lots more gray hair than I have, assuming that you even keep your hair at that point, because it's just not going to happen and you're not going to be successful if you try to do that. So, but again, this is a little bit of a new message. The hybrid, not so much, but the co-management, 100%. This is a new message we just started calling out maybe at the end of the summer, that we don't want people on co-management. These are not end goals for organizations. Okay, I think that brings us to the more tangible stuff, which is, okay, you've hit me with all this stuff, basically all this hand wavy stuff where Microsoft wants us to go. How do I start? You just told me that it is a bigger endeavor. You just told me that it's not something that I'm going to be able to do overnight, right? And definitely not something you want to do on Friday before you go home for work, right? So how do I even get started and what are the bigger challenges? Well, the first one that comes to almost everybody's mind really is group policy. I'll table that one for the second slide. Let's talk about the first one, that immediate cloud value. And I talked a little bit about this already, right? It's joining those existing devices to Azure by hybrid joining them. And I said Azure, I meant Entra, right? We've had our wonderful name change, so we still stumble on that on occasion. But join those devices to Entra ID, right? Get them hybrid joined. And now you're going to be able to immediately take advantage of things that are only in the cloud, things like endpoint privilege management, EPM, right? Which is part of Intune. Things like driver management, again, also part of Intune. We have no solutions and have no intent for having any on-prem centric solutions for these types of things. There is a relatively medium-sized list. It used to be a short list. I can't say it's explicitly a long list yet, but it is growing. And I don't think it's going to be too long before it is a long list of things that are only going to be offered to you via Azure ID, etc. So, right, that's where we want folks to realize that they can get that value right away just by simply joining your existing devices and co-managing them. Again, that seems like it may be a contradiction what I just said. I said these are not your long-term end goal states. And that's exactly it. That's not really a contradiction. These are interim states. It's okay if you do these now with the goal of getting rid of them at some point in the relatively near future, right? We're not talking 20 years, right? We're not talking past all of our retirements. We're talking hopefully within my retirement time, because I'd like to see all of this happen as well.
So Jason, can I just ask then,
Absolutely.
so a lot of customers, especially when it comes to touching and amending devices, there's a lot of hesitancy to get in the way of their end users. They don't want
Yeah.
to impact them. They don't want any downtime, anything like that. And I know you've mentioned this approach and there's a few others and what the end goal is, but if they're just about to start having these conversations with their senior leaders, and apart from the obvious, which is you should be on the most up-to-date Windows operating system, for getting senior leadership buy-in, you've mentioned the value is in compliance and application management, but what's going to appeal to those C-level people if you're trying to get buy-in? What's the most successful value proposition that you think our admins and our architects should be using to get buy-in from senior leaders?
Yeah, super fabulous question. It's one that we kind of gloss over sometimes when we're talking about the technical. And it's one of the reasons I like being a little bit more hand wavy, is because ultimately this is kind of driven from those C-level folks, right? So one of the best examples I have is operating system deployment, our traditional, right? Super, super complex as an outsider. If you're someone who does OSD every day, if you're someone who loves task sequencing within Config Manager, it's actually pretty easy. It's super powerful. It's pretty easy. It can work really well if you know what you're doing. But if you're newbie, if you've done Mac OS, if you've done iOS, if you come from Linux, if you come from any other discipline, basically, that gets real complicated real quick. And when something goes wrong, it's really difficult to troubleshoot. Again, unless you really know that stuff. And there's not that many people that really know it. I mean, we're talking, I don't even know what the number is, but it is a small percentage when we're talking about it. So now you amplify that up to what the C-level sees. They see this big, hairy, complex thing, because when something happens, that's what the message gets delivered to them. Hey, this thing's really complex. Yeah, our guy's really smart, but it's really complex. The C-level folks, they don't want to hear that, right? They want to hear simplicity. They want to hear, again, and I said this before, how do we make our widgets faster, better, or cheaper, right? And task sequencing, what does that have to do with me doing that? It really doesn't. And so they want to move all of these processes off to the cloud. And that's what this ultimate thing is. As far as explicitly user disruption, because that does take away from the whole widget statement, right? If my users can't use that tool, because it's what the computer is to the vast majority of users, it's the telephone. And if that computer is not available to them, then there's going to be issues. That's nothing new. Everything we've done in IT has always had a small amount of disruption. Anytime there's change, there's going to be some small amount of disruption. But the ultimate promise of the cloud, right? Getting there is going to cause a disruption. But once you get there and you've commoditized all of these processes, things like preserving your user data in the cloud, right? That's a huge one. OneDrive was pretty much, I won't say revolutionary, but process-wise, the technology wasn't, but the process itself, storing all of your stuff up in OneDrive. I mean, even for me at home, anytime I've switched devices over the years, and I remember doing this, right? Just pulling out USB drives or CDs and backing up all your data, and you'd still always be real nervous at that point. Oh, I'm going to format my drive and something's going to be gone. Well, clearly the same thing happens with business users. But OneDrive kind of changed all that, and it definitely changed it for me at home. Everything's up in OneDrive. It's there. I don't have to worry about it. I can get to it from anywhere, right? That's another huge advantage to all of this. And so once I've started moving all of these things to the cloud where they're always persistent, then this user disruption and this user downtime, because it's going to happen even if we don't make changes. Users are going to lose laptops. They're going to have to upgrade to Windows 11, right? And we're going to have our hardware floor change. Something else is going to happen. That device is going to get infected. It 100% happens. There's rootkits, there's malware, there's stuff out there that we fight like mad to make sure it doesn't happen. But there's some really smart people out there that really fight like mad to make sure it does happen. Things happen. And so there's always going to be some external force that is going to cause some type of user disruption. So the more we can move to something that is undisruptible, like Azure, right? And the cloud services in general that have these wonderful SLAs, because we put in tons and tons of engineering time to make sure that we can meet those SLAs, the better off your users and your organization is going to be at the long run. And your business continuity is 100% going to benefit from those things. Again, very hand wavy because that's C-level talk, but
I get it. So if we kind of filter it down, then it's operational efficiencies overall, because you don't have to use the same group of highly trained staff every time.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's reduced downtime longer term. And then thirdly, this is a great stepping stone in terms of leveraging the rest of a customer's investment in things like cloud security, M365 for digital workplace and collaboration, and Entra ID in terms of identity and access management in the cloud. Those would be like the three killer reasons why, the C-level should care and should invest in customers and our identity and end user compute teams getting this over the line and spinning up that project, doing it in a phase rollout, and get moving on it.
Yeah, it sounds like we should transcribe that and turn that into a document, because what you just said is
Where's Copilot? I'm sure Copilot's built into my walls at some point. Yeah, we'll get it. The blog will be up after this post.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will say, as far as the highly trained people, that your very first statement, some people could take that as a negative, right? Oh, they're taking away my job from me. No, again, we're taking away those things that should just be commoditized from you, right? You're not the button pusher. You shouldn't strive to be the button pusher in an organization. Simply pushing the button isn't of value to your organization. Thinking about business challenges and how to apply technology to address those business challenges, that's what's valuable to your organization. And as anybody that wants to be valued in their organization, that's what they should strive to be, right? Not just that person that, like George Jetson was the perfect example. I know that, of course, dates me and anyone else maybe who's seen it, because it's an old show, but that was his job. Literally, he went to work every day and he pushed a button, and there were whole episodes about him just going to work and pushing a button, right? That's not a value. And so you as an IT pro should strive to be way more than the button pusher in the long run. And even in the short run, and taking away all of these mundane, really tasks that should be automated, or that every organization does and can be done way better by someone like, what we do in Entra and Azure, just should make sense to everyone at the end of the day. Okay, let's hop into one of the first demos here, and that is moving to, that's the wrong button. That is moving your workloads over in Config Manager. And I need to find the right, let's see here. I will do my entire screen because I have a screen set up here. There we go. So I will be looking off over here. I'm assuming that is up. Yes, it looks like it is. Okay.
It is indeed. That's a screen I haven't seen in a long time, thankfully.
Excellent. Yes, this is Config Manager, right? This is a little bit older, but basically we're talking about our sliders, our workloads that are in Config Manager. And so I'm going to hit properties. That takes a few seconds to come up because it actually does have to go out to the cloud and pull back the information. I'm assuming I hit properties. It's always a question mark sometimes. There, and it flashed in the background as soon as I was clicking around. So let me pull it back up. So basically, we were talking about these handful of properties. So why do we have these workloads? I alluded to it a little bit when I mentioned the meaning of co-management. Right, it is about arbitrating responsibilities for management tasks between Config Manager and Intune. Right, we don't want them stepping on each other. So that's exactly what these workloads represent. Right, who owns what? Now, one of the problems that's in this dialogue itself is that it says pilot Intune, and clearly the documentation is going to call this out as well. All this really means is that you have some devices where this workload is shifted over to Intune and some where it's remained on Config Manager. You can clearly see here in my lab that I have some of these workloads are set where some devices are doing it and some aren't. And then I have a couple where they are. Actually, probably I have one at this point in time. This is only a lab, right? I haven't modeled the full world here. But I can shift it completely over to Intune. To do the sum, there's this staging tab. And I can put in different collections. These all don't have to be the same collection. So collection of devices themselves, some subset of my entire population of devices. And I can say, okay, for compliance policies, only the devices in this collection are going to have that workload shifted over. So bottom line here is when you're reading this, right, this pilot Intune here, and I can do this just for a little bit more clarity. And I think, yeah, they added an ellipse recently to zoom it. There we go. So that pilot Intune, just read that as some devices in Intune. Don't get fixated on the word pilot here because that's just going to throw you off. But I had this on the slide as well, right? There are some easy wins in here, compliance being one of them. If I shift this over to Intune, or at least some Intune, or some for some of my devices, I'm immediately going to be able to take advantage of some really cool things. And I'm assuming there's been a session on this at some point on this show. Conditional access, right? Conditional access is the foundation of zero trust, right? And if you're not at least cursorily, that's a word, aware of zero trust, then you're missing out. It's one of those things that is very foundational to IT these days, and very foundational for everything going forward as far as security goes. And at the bottom of that pyramid, because it really is a pyramid from a Microsoft perspective, is conditional access, right? It's about the identity and the compliance of the device associated with the, where that identity exists. That's what compliance is going to give you. And moving this over has almost no impact in Config Manager. Everything in Config Manager can still work. There's simply one checkbox on your baselines that you have to flip. So this one's kind of a no-op, no-brainer. Just go ahead and do this one. Look at your baselines, flip that switch. There's scripts out there that will do that for you, so not too big of a deal. The next one is client apps. Go ahead and switch this one over. Again, I have it, only some, just playing around in the lab, doing different things. That's not what you should do. Just flip this one all the way over. This does not disable anything in Config Manager whatsoever. So right off the bat, you can start deploying apps from Intune, and we want to get there, right? So the sooner you can start doing these things without compromising, right, getting that immediate cloud value, the sooner you're going to be on your way to being successful with all of this. Office, this is really about Office deployment. So this is an easy one to move over. I don't have this one on my slide, but this generally is an easy one to move over as well, because deploying updates to Office should just be done through the Office click to run updater, right? So that's part of Office itself. There's some gray areas there, so you want to evaluate this one a little one, but this one could be an easy win. And the other one, and this one isn't one that you want to do necessarily lightly. You want to do a little bit of planning for this one, but Windows updates, right? We get a lot of pushback on Windows Update. Oh, I lose control over my Windows updates if I do this, because folks have a perception that they need to micromanage Windows updates. Like, well, what about all of the other updates? And I think this is fairly up to date. I actually didn't check this yesterday, so maybe we'll be a little bit surprised. I only have one update group in here, right? It is for my Windows 11 quality updates. But if I go ahead and double click on that, right, we're not talking about a lot of updates to micromanage. Why do you need to go in? What control do folks need? A lot of folks, for some reason, continue to harken back to Windows 7 days, when there were probably, at least 30, 40, 50 updates every month, just for for Windows 7 in here. And they had to go through and they had to pick and choose. Well, I like this update. I don't like this update, right? Etc. We don't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore, even if you wanted to do that. We simply have these cumulative updates. And notice some of these are for different versions, right? We have x64 and we have these are all x64 in here. There's not a lot to micromanage in here, right? We have the 09s, we have the 10s, right? There's no choice anymore. You're not losing any control, because there is no control to be had with Windows updates once you start moving to Windows Update for Business and starting to go to auto patch as well, where you're effectively having it managed for you. These are easy wins for your organization without losing anything. And it's something to take off your plate. I mean, no one likes doing Windows updates. I've talked about Windows updates in my career a lot, not because I ever liked talking about them, but because they were so painful. So why not shift it to someone that is doing it really well, like AutoPatch, or at least to a service where you're not having to worry about all of the infrastructure, all of the binaries, all of the other, I'll say crud, right? I guess that's a relatively crude word, but all of the other crud that you have to worry about with Windows updates. It really is an easy win. It takes a little bit of planning. It takes some testing. There's some differences, right? That's another kind of bottom line in all of this. Just because things are different doesn't make them wrong, right? Different means you have to learn some new things. It means you have to get used to some new things. It means you have to train your users, right? There's always some user training in here. But these are generally easy wins and things to take off your plate so you can go focus on those bigger things, making the widgets bigger, better, faster, cheaper, right? Okay, I think we will go back to the slides here really quick. That was done with demo 1. And what slide are we on here? Applications I talked about a little bit. Actually, you know what, Grace? Let's stay right here because applications is the next one. I wanted to talk a little bit about applications. So we'll stay on the
Go
demo.
for it.
So applications, and I'm actually going to hop over to Intune here. Right, we have Win32 apps. They're actually LOB apps. These are kind of the classic app type, even though they're for MSIs and MSIXs. We generally tell folks not to do LOB apps, right? Because it is limited to MSIXs and MSIs. But there's other limitations there. You can't really do any customization. There's conflicts that can happen during autopilot. Everything in general should be Win32. That adds an extra step that we fully understand that folks find kind of painful, but there's ways to automate it. There's lots of community solutions to automate it. Once you get used to doing it, it's really not that big of a deal to actually do. It's a learning process. Again, it's different. So clearly people are going to be a little bit hesitant to change. That's just kind of human nature. But once you get used to it, it's pretty quick and easy. But the cool thing to show is we have this new thing coming out. Danny's the main feature PM for this. He's shown this a lot. I've shown it a few times at different conferences as well. It's effectively a Windows catalog, right, of apps, of Win32 apps. This is part of a bigger feature set called Enterprise App Management that is part of Intune Suite that should GA, I think it's late February 2024. So we're not too far from that. Looking at my calendar there and trying to count 3 months, right? We're about 3 months out from actually being able to have that. And what that does is it frees you, the IT admin, once again, we're commoditizing something, the power of the cloud, right? Frees you, the IT admin, from having to do that extra step, along with some additional extra steps, like figuring out the command lines, going and downloading the binaries, right? All of that other logistics that happened around app packaging and to get them into either Intune or Config Manager or whatever deployment tool you were using, we're taking that off your plate, right? We're giving you a catalog of common apps, right? Common question is how many apps or what apps are going to be in there. That hasn't been fully determined yet. The best answer there is everything that we feel we can do, that we can support, and that is going to be beneficial to our customers. Whether that's, and I'm not even going to throw out a number because Danny will throw something at me if I throw a number, but as many as we can is really the bottom line there. We want this to be super valuable for customers. But I'm going to go ahead and you can see actually there's some apps already in here created from the catalog. I'll just go ahead and show you what the current catalog is. This has been shown before publicly, so this isn't too big of a deal. The feature set itself is in private preview right now, so you're not going to be able to see this in your console. But I'm going to go ahead and click through and I will zoom in. Well, I don't know if I'm going to need to zoom in explicitly, but we'll see here.
Yeah, let's zoom in because I think that's much better. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are what is in there today. These are not necessarily guaranteed to be what's in there once we release this feature set. And actually, I guess I should have done the live zoom. Let's see if that works. It should work. All right, there we go. And I can scroll down some and you can see there's a bunch in there. I don't know the number that's in there today. I can't say I've counted. If I had to take a wag, it's probably around 50 to 60 today. That's, again, not what's going to be represented in GA. And come on, zoom it. Oh, there we go. So let me go back here real quick. And I will choose some random one. We will choose this one just because you can see we have lots of different architectures. We have lots of different languages because that's a value here too to most organizations, right? And that's always a painful part. I will go ahead and choose English because, yeah, I don't see any other languages that I speak because I don't speak any of them. Right. If you've ever created a Win32 app before, this should look exactly familiar to you. Because it is, right? These are the same screens that you're going to see. It's the same metadata that we pulled in. But again, we populate it. We've pre-populated all of this for you, right? We pre-populated that. If I go to the next screen, the programs, so the actual command line, we've pre-populated that for you. This is all something that we've curated. So it's effectively just a next process for me to go ahead and create that. It's my lab. I have other ones created, so I'm not going to actually finish this one. And you can see there's other ones in here. Bottom line is it's a catalog of apps, so you don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. And this is another, once we get this in place, but even just flipping that app workload over today, you can start creating your own apps and start deploying those from the cloud without having to worry about any on-prem infrastructure to your managed clients, right? That are managed, that are co-managed or purely Intune managed if you happen to get there already. But right, we're kind of talking about that, baby steps. Let's just get going. this is going to be easy. And once we get the catalog in there, you're going to get all this value right off the bat because all of these apps are just going to be available to you.
So Jason, in Entra ID, we've got a similar sort of concept with apps that are easily integratable from the catalog for SSO and things like that. And our customers can go and request apps that they want adding, SaaS apps. And we've got hundreds of apps there, not to show off, not to say we're beating or anything like that. It's slightly different job doing that. So how can customers request Windows apps to be added here? Is that a thing that customers can do? Or is there a certain strategy or way that the team are looking at prioritizing and how they have these apps added here?
So the initial intent here is Danny went through, and one of the exercises he went through is going and combing all of the other potential repositories that are out there and any other mechanisms that folks went and commonly got apps and figured out what the most common apps were. And those were the ones that we wanted to make sure that we had in there. So that was the initial prioritization process. That may or may not be reflected with what's in the catalog in the private preview today. I don't really think it is. Today, what's in the private preview is mostly just convenience, but that's what they want to have in there. So that's the initial wag at it. Also, the people that are in the private preview have the ability to request apps. So that's a little bit more of a tight relationship that those customers are having with the feature team at this point in time. Long run, there will be a process that folks can go and request, right? Because we know that at the end of the day, that's going to be a living, growing catalog. And so we need to have the best live data that we can get into it. And so everyone that comes in will absolutely want to solicit, that information from customers. So yeah, what that'll look like exactly, Danny hasn't figured out yet, I don't think, or at least he hasn't told me. It's certainly possible he has, but he's going to get that in there. And that's definitely one of the things they want to do.
Okay, so for the time being, then we should say for our customers that are connected directly through, say, a Microsoft account team, that they should mention it to their account manager and they'll know what to do, hopefully, with those design change requests and can get that formally, hopefully, sent back to the team. If you're not actively engaged with Microsoft support account manager or anything like that, should they go ahead and request, say, in the Azure portal through a support ticket? What would you say? Or just keep a note until this goes public preview and then post?
Wait for GA and wait for us. GA, like I said, was February 24, and wait for us to actually have a formal process. There will be a formal process at some point. We just don't have that in place yet. So.
Okay, great. And when you're ready to come to it, we do have a question from the audience.
I will go ahead and pose and answer that one. Were you going to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. Okay. So we have from Arvin. Hiya, Arvin. Any best practices for managing Windows servers running in Amazon EC2? I think that Entra ID and Intune are not for Windows servers. Can you respond?
Yeah, so Entra ID, to my knowledge, the latest versions of Windows Server, you can actually join the Entra. I'm not sure the whole value proposition for most folks wanting to do that today, although there are some reasons to actually do that. But as far as Intune goes, correct, Intune is not and has never had the mission or strategy of managing Windows servers in any form or fashion. I won't say never, because it does come up even internally from time to time and discussions get kicked off and things change, right? Beyond my control. I'm definitely not anyone that controls the purse strings, but it's never been any strategic priority for anyone up and down the chain. So I don't ever see it actually happening in Intune at this point based upon what I know and where we're at with our strategy. So being able to manage those types of servers, if you want to go to a cloud solution, there is the umbrella solution called Azure Arc, which has things in it like Azure Update Management and other components, and they will manage things regardless of the cloud, right? One of our key strategies around Azure itself is being cloud agnostic, right? That was one of the reasons Entra changed its name. And I'm speaking a little bit outside my knowledge, so Grace, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that was one of the core pieces. Was that Entra was meant to be multi-cloud or to start taking other clouds into consideration. And so they wanted to disjoint it from the pure Azure branding, right? And so that's where most of the things in Azure are going, right? We want to be able to do Linux as well, right? Everyone's seen the Microsoft loves Linux bumper stickers, et cetera, and posters. because we know that the world's not homogeneous and isn't all Microsoft. So we need to take those heterogeneous things into account.
Yeah, definitely. So from an Entra ID perspective, so first of all, good shout out. We actually have a whole show that we recorded a few weeks ago with the all-powerful Microsoft marketing team that walked through the name change and all the reasons for that. So if you want to learn more about that, go and have a look at that channel and our channel and that video. And then secondly, in terms of your question around what Entra ID supports. So for Entra Join, we support all Windows 11 and 10 devices except home editions. And we do support Windows Server 2019 and newer VMs, but they have to be running in Azure. And then for hybrid, Entra Join, we support Windows 11, Windows 10, or 8.1 except home editions, and then Windows Server 2008 R2, 2012 R2, 2016, 2019, and 2022. Now, the only thing I don't know, which I would need to filter the audience or you, Jason, is if they're running in Amazon, if that adds any additional thing. In my head, it shouldn't, because they're just VMs there, or they're virtual servers that are just there. Them being in Amazon, in my head, shouldn't make any difference. I don't know if you think it would.
As long as there's connectivity, right, it shouldn't matter. From a pure technology perspective, it shouldn't matter as long as Amazon themselves aren't doing something odd to those servers. And that's we don't always know those kinds of things. We don't keep track of, and we don't test. That's always right when our support statements come down to it for anything. We don't test those kinds of things, and so our support statements are heavily contingent on us actually having tested that solution end to end, so that we can guarantee it works. Because that's what support is effectively, a seal of, hey, we guarantee this will work, and if it doesn't, we'll fix it. But if it's in Amazon, that's completely outside of our control. So even if we did test it, there's certain things that are out we can't change. So
yeah, just tweet Jeff Bezos. He'll tell you the answer, I'm sure. He's got nothing else to do.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, cool. Let's move on.
I was going to say, let's stay with the demo, because the next slide is about group policy. I talked about that a little bit. So that's kind of the big elephant in the room. People have been using group policy for so long. And although on-prem Active Directory wasn't really a management tool, there were management aspects to it, like group policy, that just about everybody used, right? I don't know if everyone loved group policy, but it did its job pretty well for the most part, right? There were deficiencies, but it was there. So how do we get away from group policy? Because for most organizations, Windows 2000 and group policy was introduced in the year 2000, hence the name. So 23 years ago, there are organizations that have literally that much of, and I'm going to say it here, garbage piled up in group policy. And to me, that's a key word, right? Because that stuff that people put in there 20 years ago, 15, 10, maybe even 5 years ago, you have no idea why it's even there anymore, right? And no one does, but everyone's afraid to touch it, right? And that's one of the classic challenges. I've been into many organizations where they're like, yeah, we're not allowed to touch group policy anymore, because the last time someone did, which was X number of years ago, everything broke. And so they're not even allowed to do anything in there anymore. And it's like, that's not the way to do this. It's not the purpose here. And if it's so modeled, I guess that's a word, MOTTLED, I think. If it's so, monkey in the gear works, or monkey wrench in the gear works, lots of cliches we can throw at it there. If it's so poor at this point, and you're so afraid to touch it, and that's just wrong, right? You just lost all of your value from it in the beginning. That's what we don't want. And in general, that's how most people's group policies are. Even if they don't treat it that way, they are always very afraid to touch things. And because they don't know, and they don't have those actual requirements set. So when we start talking about group policy, the first statement always is, don't convert what you have. Go and rationalize what you have. Go and work from your actual requirements, right? What you have implemented, kind of the culmination of all of those statements that I made, is what you have implemented is not necessarily the realization, and almost certainly isn't the realization of your requirements. It's the culmination of lots of different people either playing with it or interpreting what the requirements are, or how the requirements should be implemented. And those requirements may not even exist anymore, right? So what you have in there today is probably not what you need. Almost certainly is not what you truly need. So you need to take a step back. You can certainly use those as kind of a starting point to do some rationalization, but you really should be starting over once you go into Intune and go with MDM policy. There's another reason to do that, is And it's because that the whole point of moving to the cloud as well, the commoditization is simplification, right? Users have evolved. Users have changed. One of the reasons we consistently hear users loving other platforms is because the complexity that is involved with their administrators managing their Windows platforms, right? There was a really famous white paper that was written a handful of years ago by a famous three-letter company where they said, oh, us managing our Fruity systems is so much easier than our Windows systems. But when you look at what was really said in there, it was because they weren't doing a lot of management on their Fruity systems. They were so heavy-handed, and this is what most organizations do. And most IT admins, they do because they can, not because they should. And that's what we've traditionally enabled as Microsoft. And administrators have just picked up on. And it's cool to do. I'm totally guilty of this. So bottom line here is make sure you're not just garbage in, garbage out. Don't just bring it over. Look at it, rationalize, make sure it's really what you want. Make sure that you've gotten rid of or, again, started fresh. So how do we start fresh? Well, let's first look at the actual rationalization. So we actually have a tool here. It's called Group Policy Analytics, right? Nice little node here in the device console. And I actually imported a generic group policy in here. You can see it's from the US Department of Defense, the STIGs that they have. I actually went and downloaded this yesterday. There's a whole set of STIGs that you can actually start with. And this is effectively an export from the Group Policy Management Console, right, which spits out a bunch of files, including an XML file that has the complete results in here, or the complete tally of all the policies that are actually in here. So I actually went and imported it almost instantly. This is a relatively small policy, but it was pretty much instant. It tells me, hey, how many of these policies can I actually directly bring over, right? And if I click on this, it's going to actually tell me which ones, right? It's not just this percentage that's kind of meaningless, but it's going to tell me which ones. And now I can actually go in and I can look, hey, why don't these have MDM support? And there's different reasons why some of them may or may not have MDM support. Maybe they've changed over the years. There's lots of different reasons. We see lots of legacy policy for things like Microsoft Messenger. Like, what? Why do you care? Why do you have a policy? Why do you want to convert a policy for something that hasn't even been in the product for whatever, 10, 15 years? Right? It goes back to just don't blindly convert everything. Go and rationalize. Go review. Now, the cool thing is you can, if you want, again, we don't typically recommend this, but if you've gone through and said, hey, this is the baseline we want because this is the STIG and we have to, or this is the requirements that we know we've gone through, we researched, we want. There's actually a migrate button up here. There is effectively an easy button with caveats, that you can push and boom, you're going to have all of those policies migrated over to Intune and you're going to be able to do that. And it's going to be a bit of a process here. Oops, I hit the wrong button there. I don't know how I jumped over the tab. Oh, I know, because it called up that report and I hit, it went out to information about that. So let me go back. You're going to have multiple different policies in here. Clearly, I only imported one, right? You're going to have lots of them in here depending upon the complexity and history of your organization. And you're going to have to go through multiples. You're going to have to reconcile differences. Intune handles policies different, right? It doesn't resolve conflicts. Conflicts happen, and Intune does not send those down to the device if it detects a conflict for a specific device. So you've got to make sure that you don't have overlapping, conflicting policies with Intune before. Intune gives you a report of that, so it doesn't just say, hey, I'm not doing anything, and have fun, go find out on your own. So you're going to have a little bit of legwork to do there, and you're going to have to do some reconciliation. You're also going to have to figure out how you're going to do targeting. Targeting is different in Intune, right? Targeting is all about your Entra ID groups. Whereas in group policy, you could do AD groups, you had WMI filtering, you had a handful of other things that you could do there. So there was a little bit potentially more flexibility. This is an area of deep investigation right now for the Intune team. We know this is a limiter for certain scenarios for certain customers, and so we want to make some improvements there. So deep investigation, hopefully over the next, this is not short-term type things, but over the next couple of years, we're going to have some huge improvements there, and our friends at Entra ID are making some improvements that we want as well. So that's all going to get better as time goes on. But having said that, we do have some extremely large organizations. We're talking 6 figures plus, right? That are using Intune successfully, that are using AAD groups successfully to do all of this targeting. So it's It's different, yes, but different doesn't mean wrong. It means you just have to shift your perspective, that you have to rethink your problem and not translate the implementation of how you solve that problem. So going back to your requirements, what do I need to do? How do I model what I need to do in this new solution instead of thinking about it in the old terms? So great tool here, right? You can import in all of your policies. You can rationalize. There are some unknown settings in here, right? And there are a couple of settings. You're going to run into a couple of settings here and there. The policy set and what you can actually configure in Windows evolves every month effectively, right? Every time we put out a new CU, there's something new. And so there's no way the Intune UI is ever going to keep up with that. There's no way the MDM policy system itself is going to be able to keep up with that. That gap, in our opinion, is super small for the vast majority of customers and really non-existent for the vast majority of customers. And there are ways of working around it. They're not always the best ways or the ways that folks want to do it, like scripts. But we've always used scripts. We need to, I mean, when people say, oh, I don't want to do scripts, to me, that's being intellectually dishonest, because I've always written scripts as an IT admin. And that was always part of something I did and liked doing. So, going back to the value of an IT pro, right? That is it. It's not pushing the button. It's being able to figure out how to implement the things that are missing, that are required for my organization. Of course, you need to validate. Should I really be doing this? Right? I said that before. Stop thinking about what you can do and make sure that you're doing what you should be doing in your organization. One other thing to point out in here, and we'll go to Endpoint Security Blade here. We'll go to baselines. A lot of folks, when they're starting over, or they're maybe starting new, they are born in the cloud, or there's, kind of starting over just means, completely wiping the slate clean. So you're kind of the same place. You're starting new. Where do I start? We've got all these policies. Again, what you should be doing, and what does everyone absolutely need to be doing and should be doing? Security, right? Clearly. So that's where the security baselines. Start with the security baselines. Start with your minimum viable set of security baselines and build from there, and make sure you have a defined, articulated need, right? Not because, oh, I think this would be cool, right? That doesn't help anybody. All you're doing is making your job more difficult by adding permutations to the mix in the long run. So within the baselines, right, we've given you lots of good stuff to start with, and looks like Amit started a test here. We can actually click into what Amit started, and I can look at all the different ones, or I can create a new one. Let me just go ahead and do that really quick. And this one looked like it was for Edge, right? So we can do that. I'll do test. And we have lots of different Edge settings in here, right? Granted, there's always more that you can do. Again, there's almost an unlimited number of settings you can have for any application for the OS itself. But again, do you need to even look at them? One of the things that people did in the group policy days is they would get this wonderful Excel spreadsheet, and they would have these monthly or whatever meetings every time we released the spreadsheet, and they would go through every single setting, right? And we're just like, and they would come to us and be like, well, how do we manage this? And the answer has always been, and still should be, you don't. We don't want you doing that. Just because something is possible doesn't mean you should be doing it. You should be doing it because you should be doing it. Again, you have a defined, articulated need and requirement beforehand, before you go start looking for those kinds of things. I also want to acknowledge it is much easier said, or for me to say some of these things, than for folks to actually do. This goes back to it not being an overnight thing. Don't expect to just plop everything into your policy analytics, have it spit out a few things, and be on your merry way on Friday, and be, not have everything blow up on you over the weekend. That's not the intent here, right? This is a process that you're going to have to go through, and it's going to take you many cycles of going through it, many iterations of going through it, and making sure that it's right for the business. But the end goal, and those three statements that Grace put out there before, that kind of summarized it, simplifying all of this so that your long-term life, your long-term ability to benefit the business, that's where we want you to go, and that's what all of this is going to move you towards. Okay, I have no idea what my next slide was. Let me look at what it possibly was. Here we go. There we go. Yeah, so this is kind of starting the wrapping up, and this is a little bit of hand wavy here as well, but just because there's not much to explicitly show. But another part of this, and I think the getting started slide, it had this kind of like ladder that went up, right? You can characterize this in any way. You have to start. One of the things that we hear from people is, oh, it's so complicated, or there's so much going on. that I'm not even going to start. Now, they don't say that I'm not going to start, but that's effectively what people are saying. You can't do that with this. You have to just start. The cool thing with a lot of this, again, the hybrid join, the co-management, they're effectively no ops in your environment. You haven't changed the configuration of anything yet, right? So you can get those things going and you can start taking these baby steps. And those baby steps, that's the point of me demonstrating some of these things, is these are the baby steps you can start doing. You can start moving the workloads over for some of the devices, right? You can start transitioning some of your group policies over and targeting only those specific devices that you want to target. Now, going back to the two checkbox slides that I had early on about new devices, right? When you're provisioning new devices, that's when you really want to start making this hard cutover of leaving on-prem behind, right? And making everything completely cloud native. That's where this comes in. That's where this autopilot comes in, right? Start with autopilot. It's the easiest way to get this done. The first link at the bottom there, that tutorial Get Started, a couple of colleagues of mine put that together. It's literally an A to Z. How do I start with autopilot fresh from scratch in kind of a POC environment, right? It tells you all the knobs and switches for, pure test that you need to be able to set up to get going. And it's literally, yes, it's a little bit of a longer document, but you can get through it easily in an hour and you can be up and running with autopilot testing in your environment without impacting anything else in your environment. And now you have that clean, pristine box that is completely cloud native, right? Number two here, and I said this before, start with that minimum viable set of security policies, right? Start with that security baseline to make sure that no one in security is going to be mad at you, right? So maybe you're going to have to put some third-party AV or some DLP or something else. Make sure you're fulfilling all of your minimal requirements in your environment. And then don't layer anything else on. Start simple. Stay as simple as you can always, right? And then you can start testing, right? Focus on user scenarios as well. One of the things, going back to the can and should, is when we start doing things we can do, we're kind of losing sight of what the users actually need, right? We're losing sight that it's just a tool for them. It doesn't have to be cool for them. It just has to work, and it has to work simply for them. Sometimes that means taking things off the start menu. Sometimes it means, getting into the weeds. But at the end of the day, users have been using Windows now just as long as we have, right? They've been using it for 20 to 30 years. One of my statements that I've made in the past, and it's been a while since I've made this one, and again, easier for me to say than always to pull off, but if you treat your users like babies, that's all they will ever be, right? You need to bring them along. It's not always a perfect statement, FLW scenarios, that's not going to be the perfect statement, right? There's different scenarios that are out there, but think ahead, think about those kinds of things. And make sure you're doing it because, and I've said this a bunch of times, and I always come back to it, do it because you should.
That's a great sentiment.
I think there are two main slides left, and I have a couple minutes here to finish right around on time so I don't bore everyone too much. Dependencies. This is super important because there's things outside of our control. There's things every organization has had that are outside of our control. Our being Microsoft's, right? Intunes, Entra IDs. You've got lots of things on-prem processes. You may have data going into Active Directory. You may have data going into on-prem databases. You may have an application that's locked on-prem for whatever reason, right? Just because it was created 20 years ago and the cloud was just a figment of everyone's imagination at that time. There's lots of things in your environment that are going to be outside of our control and you need to go analyze. A lot of times the only way to figure these things out, though, is kind of that decibel test, right? Or to actually go try them. And that's why the user-centric is also super important here. But you have to have that device, that pure cloud native device, kind of mimicking your end state before you can actually go start discovering those kinds of things. It's very much like an app compat exercise. You just have to go through the motions. There are far too many things in most organizations for any one person, let alone even a group of people to know what's going on in an environment. And so you're going to have to incrementally test. And that incremental test should kind of mimic the organization as well, right? Start tackling pieces of the organization. Don't try to, boil the whole ocean, eat the whole elephant. Again, lots of cliches we can throw at it. Look at your finance folks, right? Finance folks, throw them out there. They're usually a fairly easy set of folks to handle because their requirements are pretty small. They're maybe using SAP. They're maybe using, SaaS applications. So they're super easy to move across at that point in time. But you need to start focusing on each one of those scenarios individually. Don't try to take it all at one time, because that's another way that you're just going to be overwhelmed, and it's going to lead to you, losing hair and not being successful at the end of the day. There's lots of important callouts. I think we'll leave this one mainly to the slide on here. I called out zero trust. I called out the top one. Actually, I didn't call out the top one. The top one is an important one to call out. This is a question we get a lot. Hey, I've got all these hybrid join devices. How do I get them to Azure AD or Entra join devices? The only supported way to do that is with a reset, reimage, or reinstall of the OS. We have no intent of making a tool. It's a discussion I'll happily have with anyone. It's something that we've agonized over, but that is where we're at, and I don't ever see that one changing because of the engineering cost involved versus the actual benefits that we see on that one. So plan for resetting your devices at some point, and that's why doing it at the time you upgrade to Windows 11 is a great time to actually do that. Should because you can, or instead of because you can, I called out that one. Testing, super important. We all know this one again, right? Don't do it on Friday and leave it, right? Make sure you've gone through all of those, wonderful pieces. Another awesome statement I like to throw out there is a lot of folks say that they don't have a test environment. And the answer to that is, well, you actually do have a test environment. You just happen to call it production. Right. And that's a way of taking a shot at you, saying that, yeah, you really need to have separate devices, maybe a separate network, separate things, so that you're not impacting production to test some of these things out. And then the last one I've harped on a lot, right? It's not an all or nothing or an overnight endeavor. You're going to have to plan these things out in phases. Take those steps, particularly the ones that I demonstrated here and I called out here and are in the deck as well. Take those steps that you can today that are effectively no ops, right? That don't change the current configuration, that don't have the user impact, so that you can start getting all of those other things in place, so that you can start doing the testing, so that you can start moving your organization over in pieces. Okay, I think this is the last. Yeah, this is the last slide, and there's a slide after this, but it has links in it, so we clearly won't show that one. Here's kind of the bottom line for all of this, right? And I called this out at the beginning. This is our reality. This is Microsoft's reality. We are cloud-centric, focused on cloud-centric solutions, cloud-based solutions. This is where we see the most value. And this is driven by customer demand, right? This isn't something we just woke up one day and said, hey, this is cool, let's go do this. We didn't do because we could. We did because we should, based upon customer demand. And that's 100% true. We've talked to tons of folks that pay the bills, right? That pay our bills, that pay our salaries. And this is where they see the most value, so that they can make more widgets, make them faster, or make them cheaper, right? And this is where we're going. We're not going back, right? All of those on-prem things are there. They're going to support those scenarios that they continue to support. I don't see any of them explicitly going away anytime soon, but they're also not going to get improved either, right? Everything that we're doing is about improving and adding value to our cloud scenarios. Okay, I think I've talked a lot. We answered one question. I know there's a conversation that can happen in LinkedIn here, right, Grace? Happy to do that. I am not on X anymore, so I don't answer anything on X for mainly just I object to everything about X today. So I am happy to have conversations in LinkedIn. I don't think my email is out there anywhere, but if you happen to find my email somewhere, I'm free. Please, send me email. And yeah, these are conversations that we need to learn from as well. Another thing from a Microsoft perspective, we don't know it all. Sometimes clearly me talking and me being, I think I was a little bit enthusiastic, and I'm excited about this topic because I think it's such an important one. But that doesn't mean I know everything about this. And there are always things that we can learn from customers. So we want to talk to customers. We want to help you succeed. And me personally, I want to help you succeed. Right. I'm not in this business so that I can just pat myself on the back. I want to see people. And I like to be able to tell people that, yeah, I helped that company, or see that. And, I've told my daughters over the years, oh, yeah, I've helped X and Y, you're doing, whatever they're doing at the time. I've helped that company be successful, because I went on site with them. I did this kind of thing. And whether my daughters cared or not, I don't really know. But, I did. And it's something to be able to do. I want to help people succeed.
Well, if it helps you, if it makes you feel any better, the majority of my family think I just reset passwords for a living, so at least yours care. Um, so I just want to say thank you so much. There was so much interesting stuff there, and we've got a ton of positive feedback on various streams, on YouTube comments, on LinkedIn and Twitch. So feel free to go and have a look at those and grab some of the feedback there to send on. Also, we'll keep this conversation open. If you're watching back on YouTube, we do monitor the comments, so please do post and then we'll respond. And then if we can't, we'll get Jason to answer and make sure that he gets visibility of those as well. So first of all, thank you so much. I've learned so much. And I think for those of you listening, the key takeaways are just make a start. That's the best way to do it, is to just start. This is quite a big change for a lot of organizations that have done things, as you put it, just the same way for a while. And I know how difficult it can be to try and unpick group policy, permissions and everything, and group memberships over the years. And so if you can do that in a proactive way and start afresh, why wouldn't you? Because there's nothing worse than having to try and do that reactively when you've not planned it, because everything is under 10 times much more pressure. So definitely see how you can factor this in. And if you need to, move to co-management first and do pilots and add this as part of your device refresh or Windows 11 rollout. That's the most common way that we see this be a success with our customers. And again, almost question everything. Why do you have that security baseline? Do you still need it? Has that been superseded by something you've got now in the cloud, or just something that's quite simply more modern, because these things have been around for 15 years or so? And take this opportunity to start afresh and clean up, because things can get so complex so quickly over the years. And group policy is that perfect example. Is why wouldn't you want to try and move away from that operational mess, in quotes, well-designed mess, I'm sure, but one that's difficult to unpick. And also, don't try and boil the ocean. These, depending on if you've got 5 devices or 500,000 devices, you need to make sure in terms of your phased rollout and your deployments, you're doing it in a way that's not going to drown your help desk. It's not going to cause your users to completely stop working. And also, it's a learning curve. Jason mentioned there's a lot of stuff that you've got to learn about this new way of managing your desktops and your policies and your apps. And we've got a plethora of learning material that's available online. I think there's even dedicated exams now for Intune management and Entra management and security in the cloud. So make sure that you feel comfortable and confident in that as well. This isn't the solution to get rid of AD, but there was a very good question. Someone said, why Entra hybrid joined? Why not that? And I would quite simply say, well, why not Entra joined? Why do hybrid? Like, give me a good enough reason why you need to be in that state, because that's fine. But I think you should actually be looking at, okay, everything should be cloud only and cloud, but where does it need to be hybrid? And examine if there isn't a thing. And then we've got lots of documentation that will help assess that workflow. So we've gone over time. So I'm just going to quickly finish with saying thank you so much, Jason. Thank you so much for your audience. Thank you, production team, and those back of house. Greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to watch back for our plethora of other shows. Also, shout out next week. We have a fantastic deep dive and debug into our SASE solution and troubleshooting, getting really into the ones and zeros on that one. And then the week after, we'll be talking more devices, but this time we'll be talking about AVD and Windows 365. And this update is something that's very close to my heart, because I worked on it for a couple of years with the team, and this is passwordless SSO to AVD and Windows 365. So we're going to get really under the hood on that one as well. So don't forget to tune in for those. Look back, like and subscribe. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Jason, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, everybody.